Last week, during youth group, I told one of the kids that practice makes perfect in reference to painting. And being the quick-witted individual he was, he said, "That's not what you said this morning." I didn't know whether to be impressed or laugh at him. Because we made a statement that, entrance into the kingdom of heaven demands perfect obedience to the law. And I said at the end, no one is perfect and no one can be perfect. So at least I know he was paying attention. We're continuing our mini-series on, it's like a series within a series, but the impossibility of perfection. When Jesus explains to his disciples this crucial truth on what's commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. But what we're going to see this morning is, so Jesus is continuing with this teaching. And it's not just an emphasis on the law, where if one structures himself and puts himself within the law, that he is allowed to get into the kingdom of heaven. What Jesus is going to explain here is that even if you follow the rules, and if you follow all of them, if your heart isn't perfectly obedient either, you're in just as much trouble. So you must also form your hearts around the law, or you are liable to the exact same judgment as one that disobeys the law physically. We are just as guilty about what we think as what we do. And so we're in Matthew chapter 5, sorry. I'm going to start at verse 17, just read and catch us up from it, and then we're going to keep going. It says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all that is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called last in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." And so we studied this a little bit last week. And when I was going back over and listening and checking out the sermon, I realized I actually forgot an entire paragraph of what I found to that. And so we're going to, little rabbit trail. But we talked about last week how the law is weighty. It matters. It's important. It's not, you can't just discard some of it and accept some of it. And as I was reading, there is something called a Chalol Hashim, where in essence, what is taught by certain scribes and teachers of Jewish law, where certain sins are far more important and far, oh man, you better not do it. And so one of these, and so they sort of rank sins where this is the definite one. Some of these other sins are bad, but not as bad as this one. And so it's an act that disgraces the entire Jewish people and religion, and thereby God. And so try to put this in a perspective here real quick, how this is born. So have you guys ever worn or seen people wear the crosses around their neck? I'm a Christian or whatever. Or sometimes people will have the fish on the back of the car, and sometimes the fish is eating something because I guess Christians are sharks. But they have these. And so for example, imagine if you accidentally cut off one of these people with a fish on the necklace, and they roll down the window and they scream at you, maybe show animal signs at you or whatever it is. And what that would do is that has disgraced now Christians. Or maybe if you guys have I go to First Baptist Church of Tumwater bumper sticker, and you get pulled over, for speeding or texting or something, So that right there is a sin that has brought shame upon First Baptist Church of Tumwater. See, that's bad news. You can bring shame to the church in Olympia. But anyways. But that's what it is. And so they have rankings of sin. So when you think of verses like when you come across the verse, what I say is when they ranked, they placed greater emphasis on things that would bring people, bad names versus tiny little sins, maybe it's a little white lie or something, okay? So that's the side note. I forgot about that. Just want to say that. Okay, so let's keep going. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And that is where Jesus drives home with this point where you have to be perfectly obedient to the law in order to gain access to the kingdom of heaven. And it's possible some of those people could say, hey, from my knowledge, I have obeyed the letter of the law. And what Jesus is going to expand as, yeah, you might, I doubt it, but let's give that the benefit of the doubt. Okay, you have obeyed the letter of the law. Now let's see if you've actually obeyed the spirit of the law. And he says in verse 21, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. And probably most of those people there can say, I have never murdered anyone. Okay, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So he references Exodus 20:13, one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not murder. Most people are like, yeah, I have obeyed that law. Cha-ching, kingdom of heaven. I'm going in. And Jesus is like, hold up a second. He says, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. How many of you guys have gotten angry at somebody? Come on, raise your hands. All going down there, okay? All right. So he says, whoever's liable to judgment, which is in reference to legal law. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And so he's escalating it here. So whoever now just insults his brother. Have you guys ever insulted your brother? Oh man, I insulted my brother so bad. I'm pretty sure that every other word out of my mouth was an insult. Maybe not every other word, every other word. But again, so my brother and I had, him and I are like best friends. But still, if you've ever insulted your brother, now you're liable to the supreme law of the land. And he escalates it one more time. He says, whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. Have you ever thought in your mind, well, that was foolish? You're an idiot, sir. You are a moron. You're liable to the hell of fire. See, what you think is just as important as what you do. Yeah, you haven't murdered, but you have thought harm or an insult to another person where that is held accountable, Jesus is saying. So he says, and he's going to expound on this a little bit. So if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. And so here he's sort of explaining a little bit more. Back in those days, obeying the law was important, so they knew, oh man, I have got to offer the sacrifices. The deed, the action is important. And Jesus is like, yes, it's important, but if your mind isn't in it, if you have insulted or there's an issue with your brother, go and take care of that first before you do the deed. See, because the spirit of the law, the mind of the law is just as important. First be reconciled to your brother and then offer your gift. Yes, relationships, and we can expound on this to go everywhere, but relationships with people in the church, they matter. They matter. They matter as you work with one another. As you know, sometimes, like I said, we're a kooky group at times. And if you have hostility against somebody, try to take care of it. It doesn't mean you're holding hands and singing kumbaya as you prance and dance around or something. It just means, have you done your part to try to make things right? And so Jesus brings this to bear, how important it is that our hearts are in it. And if not, like I said, Jesus, like, the sin here is just as important. And he says, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to judge and the judge to the guard and put you in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. And that was the end of verse 26. He's trying to encourage them. This is important. So he uses, what he's done here is he's painted this picture, remember? We have to obey the law. Like, yeah, I haven't murdered anybody. Great. Have you ever hated someone or insulted someone? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's liable for judgment just as much as the actual murder is before God. Sins of the heart are just as important. And now he takes this truth and he actually applies it now and sort of gives a little bigger picture where, hey, if you have problems with your brother or a friend, go take care of that. Work it out. If you also have problems with someone who is accusing you and taking you to court, do your best to work on it then as well. Even guys who are taking you to court, try to work this out and do your best. And he says, truly I say to you, you will never get out until you've paid the last penny. See, failure to take advantage of your chance to make things right, Jesus says, means you will have to bear the penalty of being unreconciled. Let me explain this a little bit more. So, have you apologized and made right every single time you have ever insulted, called someone foolish, hated on somebody? Have you made that right with every single person you have ever done that with over your entire life? And what Jesus is saying, you will have to pay back every single penny of that. You imagine sort of the dread that would set in at that point? I'm responsible for every idle word, every insult, every thought to anybody I have ever done anything with. Yes. Can you still stand on your 2 feet and say, yes, I have followed the law completely? The answer is no. He keeps going. He says, you've heard it that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. In reference to Exodus 20:14. And here Jesus picks another well-known command. And I didn't realize, well, I did sort of realize this because I've read, but during this time, it was an okay practice for a man to have relations with a woman if she wasn't married. I'm not saying this is what the Bible taught. I'm telling you this was the common cultural thought. It was okay for a man to do it with a woman that was not married. But it was not okay for the woman to ever do it outside of marriage. You guys tracking how that doesn't quite make sense? That's sort of how it was. And so he says in verse 28, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So hey, guys, man, we've done it. We've stayed pure. We are rocking it. I can say, hey, you know what? I have never committed adultery. Have you ever not once looked at a woman? I'll tell you this. If you say that you have not, you're lying. Because women are beautiful. Like every single one of them. It is completely a natural response. It doesn't justify what goes on in your heart. But it happens. And happens to men. And Jesus is like, have you ever looked at a woman, man, ever, in one way that was not right? You've committed adultery with her in your heart. So yeah, you might not have done the deed, but you're just as guilty. And then he goes through the extreme here, how big this is. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. So it's like, if this is such a big deal, I will never look at a woman lustfully. Is anyone going to do that? Come on. No. But that's how serious it is here. But if your right eye causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. So like, hey, I will not sin. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Jesus is like, you're going to have to pluck out your eyes, cut off your hands, probably your legs too, probably your ears. It's pretty much what happens. It is that serious. God says, where even the heart, even the sin of the mind bears eternal consequences. No one is righteous. He keeps going. He says in verse 31, it is also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give a certificate of divorce. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 24 spells out the rules of marriage and divorce. And I don't want to go too far off this, but we have people who have been married and divorced here in our congregation, okay? And been remarried as well. And I know there's a lot of confusion, and at times there can be a little bit of shame, and like, well, are they allowed to be a deacon or somebody, whoever sinned, 25 years ago or something? Am I still being punished for that? And there's a lot of debate here, okay? And at times this passage is taken and grabbed and brought and shoved straight into our New Testament context and thought, okay? So I'm just going to try to explain this, though, in a way that doesn't shove it into our New Testament context, but just as it is there. See, in a paternal society, a society that was ruled and governed by men, the man could divorce his wife, okay? The woman could not divorce the man unless she took him and went to court and presented her case before a bunch of other men who would then decide if this woman's case was actually serious enough to even consider what she said. And then, if they were happy, these men would then tell the man to divorce his wife. You guys there? Women had no power here. The certificate of divorce was a protection piece for women of that society. It was something they could hold. It was something that they had where they were now freed from this man for whatever reason first, but for whatever reason they could take that certificate and then they could then remarry. Because back in those times, if a woman was by herself and she did not have a father figure or a brother who could take care of her, she was on her own. So it becomes that situation where the woman is like, how do I feed myself? How do I feed maybe my kids that I have with me? How do I do this? I have no husband. I can't even get a job because I don't have a man. Ah! So the certificate of divorce was something that actually helped women of that time. And so he's bringing this up where he says, whoever divorces his wife, so let him get a certificate of divorce. He's painting that picture for them who are listening, okay? But he says, I say that everyone who divorces his wife on the ground, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And so Jesus is saying, hey, I guess there was this debate back in those days where these two different camps, one camp said, hey, man, you can divorce your wife for whatever reason you want to. Whatever reason. She burned your brownies, out. I'm going to find a woman who never burns my brownies. That's how fast it could happen. That's how stupid that is, too. Burnt brownies are pretty good. Okay. And then there was another camp that took it a little more serious and said, hey, the only reason for divorces is something like, sexual immorality, where there's something legitimately wrong that there's just no recovery from. And Jesus is he's actually saying, hey, so you've heard it said about this divorce. Okay, get a certificate of divorce, all right? And Jesus is saying, hey, if you get a divorce with anybody except on the grounds of sexual immorality, so Jesus is saying, hey, according to the law, the spirit of the law, if you've gotten a divorce, it is okay. Okay, put that in quotes, okay? The goal is that both couples will live together forever. But there are times where it's just not going to recover. There's just. So he says is if you do it on any other grounds but sexual immorality, you make her commit adultery, because what is that woman going to do when she now no longer has someone who is the breadwinner and who can provide for her? What is she going to do? She's going to go get married. So Jesus is like, hey, if you have divorced your wife on a grounds not other than sexual immorality, she is gone and is now married because she's trying to ensure her survival. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And that man now who's like, hey, I will take care of you. I love you. I know you need it now. Marry her now because you were selfish over here and you divorced your wife for brownies or whatever happened. You are now, these two commit adultery according to the law. Now, some people have grabbed this truth, shoved into the New Testament, and I have heard it said that if you happen to have gotten remarried, then you are perpetually living your life in adulterous sin. No. Okay, because when you have the divorce, you are free. For the sake of the woman, she is free. She has to get married again. Now, society is different nowadays. There's a lot of things. We're not going to spend all of our time here, but I want to try to paint that picture because if you even look back in your life, and there's some people there in the crowds, and he's taken this other example, divorced his wife rather than sexual immorality, you've committed adultery. And if you happen to be the loving guy who's married a woman who has gotten a divorce, you've committed adultery. So now Jesus created a situation where we think, hey, that was actually good of him to take care of her. According to the law, it's still sin. Does a little help us, doesn't it? The weight of the law coming in on top of you, where even good stuff can still, according to the law, ugh. Now, I will say here, I do not support divorce. I don't. I mean, people get it. I'm not going to celebrate that fact. Okay? And I know there's some legitimate reasons why people do, for their safety. And so I get it. It's one of those, like, it's the result of living in a fallen world. It's a lot more complicated than just draw these boxes and try to shove it on your marriage and stuff like that. And so just take marriage seriously. That's my application for this one, okay? He keeps going. He says, all right, verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. Bleh. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is by the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, for by Jerusalem, for it is the city of a great king. Do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Have you guys ever heard, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, kids like to do it. Or I promise on my mother's grave. That was a popular one in my day, and you're like, your mom's not dead. I super promise. And so back in those times, I didn't even realize this, but there's a book, the Jewish Mishnah. It was published in around 200 AD. They have like an entire chapter on when and where and how and what type of oaths you're allowed to make. And so this is an appropriate time to make an oath. This is not. This is this. This is this. And Jesus is like, how can you guys make an oath on anything? Because you guys can't oath and base your promise on anything in heaven because you don't even own it. Or the earth, because that's mine too. And he's like, or Jerusalem, or the great king. You can't even take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. I have tried to grow hair through mental fortitude and power. I think I'm just losing it. Amen. So you can't even make the hair. So you can't even swear, I swear by my life. Because you have no control over your life and when you're going to die and when you're not and how you can change your hair color. So Jesus is like, no. And almost all of the people there, the disciples and the crowds, they've probably all made an oath at some point. He's like, no, just let your yes be yeses and your no, no. Anything more than this is evil. And the husband's probably thinking, man, I promised my wife that I would be home for lunch today. Do it again. Verse 38 says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I'm like flying through these points. So here, thou shalt not swear oaths. Thou shalt not retaliate. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Exodus 21 has laws in regards to justice done for violent crimes. They were to match the crimes done. Now, Jesus is not saying remove these laws, okay? These laws mentioned in Exodus 22. Actually, this whole mindset of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life, this was not only a biblical thing, but it's actually contained in the Code of Hammurabi, and it was an easier way to do corporate justice. So if you stole something, you had to return the price. So it wasn't like the crime was not supposed to blow and be much greater. So my child, they haven't done this, but let's say like my child, she goes to Walmart, and back in my day at the grocery store, you could actually put 5 cents into this little container, and you could get one of the pieces of candy. No one watched it. You could do 5 cents to take a handful, okay? So let's say that she took 2 pieces of candy. See, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth would say, hey, you have to give back the price of that candy. You have to take that back. An eye for an eye would not be Vera, yeah, chop off her hand and go. It wouldn't fit the punishment, okay? So he's not removing this. You've heard it say an eye for an eye. He says, verse 39, but it says, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. And if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Clyde, I need you to come on up here. Okay. Do we? Let's just pop it.
My hand's too big.
This is already scaring me here. The muscles in my fingers are too big for your puny glove. Uh-oh. Ugh. Hold on. Okay, so typical response is someone comes up to you and you're like, ah! Okay, an eye for an eye. No, that was not it, okay? All right, so hold up. All right, that was the typical response, okay? So I punch him, he punch back, okay? So Jesus is like, Christians should technically make the worst boxers ever. Because what's going to happen is, just hit me on this side, not this side, because the mic's here, okay? So this is, oh, come on, hit me like a man. Oh. The response should be, man, that was a nice punch.
Go to the other one.
Could you imagine this? Because if someone cuts you off on the road, what do you want to do? Cut them off back. Someone slaps you around. You know, a guy, dude, be like Jesus, okay? This is the... So I want you to imagine when Jesus is saying this, he's picturing eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Okay, but now he's like, no. See, when someone takes it out on you, you can't. You be like Jesus, okay? That's all right. He's like, he turns, you got to turn. On the other side. All right. Okay? That's it. Thanks, buddy. Get down, okay? We got to keep moving, all right? So Jesus is saying, I want you guys to picture this. Jesus' personal ethics. Thanks, Clyde, by the way. Thank you. Yep. All right. I told him he had to be easy on me because I'm pretty sure he could have just knocked me out, all right? But he says no. See, because the response there is, you've heard it said, love. Oh, wait, nope. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And he creates this picture of like, Jesus is like, yes, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That is legally a good system. As a corporate government, As a government, there are punishments for laws that need to match the penalties. But personally, it is not your job to take it out on them. If someone hits you, if someone takes your cloak, if someone does something, all right, I'll do the other side. That's the personal code of ethics that Jesus is giving his disciples here. And he's putting this picture in front of people, and he keeps going with this, and he piles it on. And he says, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. You have heard that it was said, I looked, there is no place I could find that said, hate your enemy in the Bible. See, what happened here is Jesus was saying, it has been said, it has been taught, you have heard. So they were being taught that it was okay to love those who are nice to you, love your neighbor, but it was okay to hate your enemy. And Jesus is like, no. It actually says in Leviticus 19:18, this is how far things had gotten. It says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. See, it had been taught that it was okay to show hatred to those who were not like you. And Jesus is like, no. I say to you, as it says in verse 44, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Don't the rich take care of their own? Don't they love each other? Your love is no different than theirs. And if you only greet your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? He's saying, look, you guys are supposed to be the Jewish people, God's chosen people, something different, and you're acting just like the Gentiles. The Gentiles go around and they greet people and are welcome to people just like they are. And they hate people who are different. You were no different. And Jesus is like, no, I want you to love your neighbor. Pray for those who persecute you. Give to them. See, disciples of Jesus are characterized by love. Not just love for their friends, but love for their enemies. And I will say, generally speaking, the church has gotten a very, very bad rap to those in the homosexual community, to those who I would even say at times churches have become poster boards for the Republican Party, where it's really easy from the pulpit for pastors to spread hate and rip into people who are not like them. We're no different than they are if we're doing that. Jesus expects something better, and he expected something better from them. It says it's love for your friends and love for those who are opposed and who are standing against you. You guys ever reacted in hate and frustration to somebody who's picking on Christians? Come on, ever? Yes. We want to get back at them. Come on, God, send the hurricanes or whatever ridiculousness that people come up with. See, it's the same mentality here that ours need to be characterized by love, and this Jesus is putting them right for them. And so you sit under here, and so far you've listened to everything Jesus has said. And he says in verse 48, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The entrance into the kingdom of heaven demands perfect obedience to the law. If you want to be part of God's plan and God's program, Jesus is telling them, you have to be perfect. And as you listen to that, your response is, Jesus, I can't. I can't be perfect. Man, I have hated on my enemies. I've smacked those who smacked me. I've called my kids fools. I've been frustrated. I've insulted. I've been mad. I've lusted after somebody else. God, what am I to do? So Romans chapter 3, verse 20. Says Paul explaining the same concept. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight. Because when we stand and we compare ourselves to the demands of the law, it's not just the legal word for word, but it's also the spirit of the law. As we see this play out in our lives, we cannot stand before it. What the law does do is the law does show us our knowledge of sin. So we're looking at this. We're very aware of the sin in our life, aren't we? We should be. As we compare ourselves to what Jesus is demanding here, our response is, God, I can't do that. Pull out my eye? I can't do it. But Paul continues, he says, but now the righteousness of God has been manifested, has been shown to us apart from the law. The law and the prophets, they bear witness to it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. The one man who has fulfilled and accomplished the law and the prophets is Jesus Christ. For there is no distinction. All have sinned, and all of us have fallen short of the glory, the standard of God. And we are made right. We are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption, and that is Jesus Christ purchasing us, that is in Christ Jesus. And so there's those who believe and are still trying to struggle through this. See, a lot of times we can just look at Matthew 5 and the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is saying it's just nice things. And he's just trying to, paint pictures. But the fact is, Jesus Christ is painting a picture of perfection. And all of us, as we look at the law and look at Jesus' demands that he's making our hair, we're like, I can't do it, God. I can't do this. And maybe you are looking at the law and you're looking at the idea about this and you realize, man, I can't measure up. I can't measure up. What I can tell you is that Jesus Christ, 2,000 years ago, he paid the penalty. He died holding the sin of the entire world, past, future, and present, yours included, where all you have to do is just say, Jesus Christ, save me. I don't measure up, Jesus. I can't do this. God, I need you, save me. And at that very moment, as you cry out to Jesus for help, you now have the righteousness of Jesus Christ standing with you on your behalf. It's been poured onto you, where you will be forgiven, your sins will be forgiven, and you can join and enter the kingdom of heaven. See, entrance into the kingdom of heaven demands perfect obedience to the law. Entrance into the kingdom of heaven demanded the blood and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And it's through faith, through us believing in that we have eternal life.